is it being discharged to surface waters, or is it being somehow beneficially reused?
Yes, in fact, we added that. We added that if on an annual basis they report to us approximately how much volume is discharged to surface water and how much volume is discharged to a beneficial use or reuse. Right. So
Good.
did you
So-
want me to respond to
Yeah,
your item?
so let's talk a little bit about this delineating waters of the U.S., getting a biologist out and that sort of thing. That's not the intent of this permit.
No, that's not the intent of this permit. And you were asking how granular are we looking for an identification of water of the United States. We did take a couple steps back. The application is solely asking for either the major downstream water bodies or the named water bodies that you know of. Now, you mentioned the whole purpose of this permit is not to have impact on the beneficial uses, and really specifically aquatic life for the most part. So, so the need to know where the discharge is and to what receiving water really comes at the point that there's non-compliance, which would adversely affect or impact a beneficial use. The way we have the reporting set up is that a violation of the permit is when there is an adverse impact or effect on a beneficial use. So that's the only time you truly need to have the exact identification of the receiving water. And we're hoping to address that the way we made the changes in the application.
Thank you for that. And then fees.
The fees, okay. So we worked with our Division of Administrative Services on that fee structure, and we focused a lot of our attention on the cost for small communities. The fee structure that was adopted on September 23rd for water purveyors, it is in my mind, it's not only for this statewide permit, but it's also for any other NPDES permit that a regional board needs to issue to a water purveyor with a drinking water system, which has site-specific or receiving water-specific issues, or TMDLs. Now, that fee schedule is graduated, and it starts at $100 for small systems, and it goes up to thousands of dollars for larger systems. The concern that Ms. Hancock has is that she has her company manages, I think it's up to 39 systems. So they have thousands of connections. For that kind of setup, they pay for one application fee, but on an annual basis, they have to pay numerous annual fees based on each individual system, where a comparable drinking water system like a metropolitan water purveyor that has one system, they pay one application fee similar to like this private company, plus only one annual fee. And there's a dramatic difference of an increase when you have operations over multiple systems, and that's her concern. Now, one thing we can look at is, since the concern is at the annual fee stage, if this is something the board does want to address, the annual fee does not become due until next year, and we can possibly address it in the fee schedule during this next year with our Division of Administrative Services. I'm not sure about that, but that's all I can speak to at this time with the fee. Okay. You had a third item about how important is it for discharges that do not reach receiving waters. You know, this permit is specifically the federal component. You have individual NPDES permits that also have a section for waste discharge requirements on what's necessary to protect groundwater. We don't have that in this permit. And so we're asking for monitoring for all the discharges that reach surface waters. We're not asking for monitoring or reporting other than just the estimated total amount of volume for what does not reach surface waters. So to answer that, we're just really looking to them to do what's common sense on where their water goes when it doesn't go to a receiving water or surface water.
And again, I think the question was sort of around, you know, the BMP expectations, and then is there a graduate, like you say, is the permit clear about, if BMPs are not required for a certain, or you remind me of volume or something that clearly doesn't reach receiving waters?
Okay, so the BMP requirement is that there's the BMP requirement on all discharges, and if it's not clear enough, it's meant to be all discharges to surface waters. And so we'll go back into the permit, and if that's not clear, we'll make sure that that's clear. And we will do that. No, we do not have an expectation on what does not go to surface water.
Yeah, that's helpful just in terms of, the comment was, if we do, dechlorination on every last project, it'll be a cost of compliance issue. And then how comfortable is staff as far as, the expectations on those type of technologies as far as BMP implementation?
Oh, well, we're looking to the associations for the BMP technologies, right? There was one item that Ms. Hancock's addressed about the drips from the chlorine analyzers and the cost to dechlorinate those small discharges. I just want to step back to the foundation of this permit, that the discharges are not to adversely impact the beneficial uses. So if those are dripping down and diluting into the surface waters and not impacting the beneficial use, it's not going to catch our attention to investigate and go after them. Again, just being practical about it.
Yes.
Well, I don't know if this exchange is complete, but there was one housekeeping matter that I had with respect to Mr. Hawk's comments, but was there another question you had for me first? Okay. Specifically, there was a red line, and I'm going to ask if Mr. Hawks could come back up to the dais or the podium for just a minute to provide some clarity. During his testimony, he described it as a red line of the permit, and I had a chance to look at it quickly, and it looks like there are a number of additional comments provided in words track changes, and so these are essential additional written comments that Mr. Hawks is submitting on behalf of the Water Association, I assume. And the board has to essentially make a decision on whether or not it wants to accept this particular written comment, because the written comment deadline for this particular item had run back on August 19th. I understand that he and others have been able to talk with Ms. Messina and staff and go through a number of those issues. But if the board is inclined, and your regulations do allow you to receive late written comments, if you are going to do that, I know the board's desire has been to move forward and to have the record closed and move through the oral comment process. I think as a matter of fairness, you would have to accept additional comments from other parties. So essentially, this comes to a decision point for you all as to whether or not you want to accept these late written comments. They may be helpful. I don't know what all is in them. Your staff haven't necessarily had a chance to review the entire document to see whether they capture just the oral comments that came in today. But my sense from Mr. Hawk's prior comment is that there are additional things in there above and beyond what he described during their presentation.
Mr. Lawful, before deciding on that, though, I would like to know what our obligations are in terms of providing responses to these late written comments. I know that staff has had their hands full trying to prepare written responses to the comments that were submitted in time. So what would be our obligations legally in terms of responding to late comments?
Well, if they are comments that you all accept and you agree to accept additional comments, I mean, this is an NPDES permit and there will need to be a responsive summary prepared. It would be possible and until your staff has an opportunity to review everything that's in there, the detail with which you are accustomed to fairly lengthy tables of responses to comments, it's possible that staff may be able to aggregate in a way that simplifies that process, but the reality is they will have an obligation to respond to them. And some of it you're also hearing from Ms. Messina today is being addressed through the response that she's providing orally, or that could be provided orally to a certain extent at an adoption meeting. But once it's in the record, your staff are going to have an obligation to respond to it in one form or another.
I'm sorry, I should have pointed this out in my original comments. When we filed our original comments in August, we provided a redlined document at that point in time that looks very much like this does. And then after we received the third final draft on October 1st or 2nd, whatever day it was, we have updated that red line to accommodate, to account for the staff changes that have been made. This is, so this is more of an update than a new set of comments, is what it's intended to be. And it's actually just intended to kind of help them out. It's because there's a number of different, a lot of this redlining here is, it's the same thing and it's repeated in different sections of the permit, and we're just trying to, you know, help out in that regard. But
Thank
I
you.
don't consider this to be new comments. There's
I,
just an
actually, I appreciate that clarification very much. And so in that spirit of a document that's being provided just to assist staff, could we sort of thread a fine needle here and not accept it officially into the record as late written comments that we would have to respond to officially, but as just a informal comment provided to staff?
Well, and my sense is, and Mr. Hawks and Ms. Messina can correct me, is I think they've already had an opportunity to discuss some of those, because when I had a quick scan through it, it looked like the marginal comments, you know, reflected, hey, as we discussed on at an October 15th meeting. So I don't know if the two of you can clarify that. I mean, my main concern is in accepting the written document. I certainly understand the goodwill behind it and the intent. It's more the fairness issue for others who
Sure.
did not submit.
And it also goes towards my, I guess, continual concern, as helpful as it is to receive feedback. The current revised permit is actually as a result of, you know, a really comprehensive set of comments and meetings and discussions that have taken place between staff and the various stakeholders. And then we get into this potentially unending loop of, you know, taking comments, making revisions, taking comments on the revisions, and then, you know, making another revisions and taking comments on that. The same goes for, you know, responses to comments and comments on responses to comments, and then responses to responses on responses to comments. So I think I'm a little bit wary of opening that as useful and informative and helpful as some of the feedback is in terms of receiving them.
Yeah, so
I agree, and I think
I-
we have additional comments. Do we
Well,
have?
there is at least one additional late comment letter apparently that Ms. Whitney just brought to my attention. So, you know, from my perspective, there are
Well, I would
three
propose
pot-
that we not accept any late written comments submitted into the record.
And what I would essentially recommend, you know, I see three options: accept and allow everybody to accept, decline, or essentially encourage your staff, for the folks who have shown up today, to follow up with them to talk through and to make sure that at least there's a common understanding as to what the intent was. Because if, you know, our goal is to get something that's clear and works for folks. There will be areas where there's disagreements, and I think most of those have probably been reflected in prior comments and will be incorporated into a responsive summary that your staff prepares. But, you know, some of these issues, just from a clarity perspective, are the kinds of things that can be worked through behind the scenes with staff.
I would agree with your third suggestion with a little caveat. I'm hoping that towards the end of this item, after the public comments have been provided to the board, that we might have a discussion and give directions to staff as to which particular issues we want staff to explore, if any, and make amendments to you know, the item that will be brought to us for adoption consideration in 2 weeks. And so my little caveat to your suggestion, Mr. Laufer, is for staff to follow up only on those items, and then to limit any additional comments only on those items and the changes that are that would be made by staff as we respond to the discussions that we'll have hopefully later today.
Thank you. So we will not be accepting official new comments, new late comments. Sorry. You'll be up later. Now we have David Kimbrough, who has requested 10 minutes, followed by Gary Soketh, followed by Pablo Ramudo.
Well, very good. Well, thank you to the members of the board, staff, and audience. My name is David Kimbrough. I'm the Water Quality Manager for Pasadena Water and Power. and I also represent a broader coalition of community water systems that have concerns about this general permit. Again, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. We have submitted written comments in the last round, and many of them were addressed, and we'd like to thank more staff for addressing those. But we do have additional new concerns based on the new comments, as well as some of the concerns that weren't addressed last time around. Oops, that went a little too fast. This is the community water system that signed the joint comment letter back in July. And so this represents, we have representatives all the way from San Diego up to Reading and everything in between. So it's a very broad coalition of community water systems. One of the concerns is, and again, we're not going to attempt to address every issue of concern, but really focus on what I think are the most important ones that are representative of our broader issues. One of these is the modification of TMDLs. And it says in the permit, and this is new language, this order solely implements requirements of existing TMDLs, and this order does not modify an existing TMDL or basin plan language. And we don't think this is correct. This is inaccurate. And we'll explain why. This is an example, small example from the Los Cerritos Channel TMDL, and it has a set of waste load applications, 5 to be precise. And it has no additional language beyond this, so there are only 5 waste load allocations. By incorporating this TMDL into this permit, you are now creating a 6th waste load allocation, which is not representative in the original TMDL document or in the basin plan amendments. A second example is the Los Angeles Area Lakes TMDL. And here you can see this is this TMDL is a very large TMDL with a large number of components. And so this is, for example, one particular component. And you can see that there are 10 waste load allocations assigned. And there's no allocation for additional or other TMDLs. These are the 10, and that's the only 10. Again, by incorporating this TMDL into this permit, you're now creating an 11th waste load allocation, which is not currently in the document and not allowed for in the document. Whoops.
I'm sorry. Please go back and explain this to me again, perhaps taking a little bit of a slower pace so that I
Okay,
can understand.
I'm just trying to be cognizant of time
Okay,
limitations.
we'll stop the clock for now.
Okay. Excellent. Yes, so there are roughly 100 TMDLs in the state. About half of them are in Los Angeles region. Now, each TMDL has a separate document, which includes a total mass, which is then, it's like a pie, and you slice the pie up and allocate the slices to different permits in this case. And so in this case, you can see that there are MS4 permittees, stormwater permittees, various other 8 parties that have an NPDES permit, and then in their permit, this allocation gets incorporated.
So that's the waste load allocation.
Right, that's right.
Okay?
And there are, in this case, 10 waste load allocations. By incorporating this TMDL into the statewide permit, you're now creating an 11th waste load
Okay,
allocation.
that's where you've lost me.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
Makes no sense.
community water systems are not listed on this table. The permit this permit or any other permit that covers discharge from community water systems, we will now be liable to comply with this TMDL. This TMDL allocation, if you'll see
No.
the end of the slides, you'll see that
No, I don't think that's right.
Well, let me go through the entire presentation, and you'll see where I make this case.
Okay.
Do you want to be included?
Well,
Because
representing, no, we
we
do not
could
actually.
reconsider, I guess.
However, I will say that there are situations where some communities may wish to be.
Okay.
But
All right, let him go ahead. and
for
proceed.
the moment, let us say that there are a list of 10, in this particular TMDL document, a list of 10 waste load allocations. So, shall we go forward? Very good.
For Deeldrin, I'll note for the record.
Okay. The statewide permit adds new waste load allocations by assigning them to community water systems in this permit. And there's additional language. According to the permit, only the Los Angeles Regional Board and San Diego Regional Board have TMDLs which can be applicable to community water systems, and that no other regions have such TMDL language. This is not correct. Here is this is an example. This is the Basin Plan Amendment for the Ballona Creek Medalist TMDL for dry weather. And it does in fact say, as correctly characterized in the permit, that there are, that any additional minor non-stormwater NPDES permits will be subject to these waste load allocations. So this is an open-ended sort of wastewater allocation. But in the same basin plan amendment for the wet weather, it specifically says short-term discharges of potable water that are required by statute are not assigned wastewater allocations. So now we have the same document saying two completely different things. So the permit's in fact in error when it says that all the TMDLs say this, when in fact not all of them do. Only a few do, in fact. Additionally, there is the question of other regions. The statewide permit says that no TMDL documents outside the Los Angeles region, San Diego region, have this other NPDES permit language. However, this is also incorrect. Here is the basin plan amendment for the Napa River bacteria TMDL, which has exactly the same language, if not actually more clearly stated. Wastewater allocations apply to any source, whether it's listed on this table or not. So it's actually clearer than the previous example. Additionally, here is the organochlorine compound TMDL from San Diego Creek, which not only has the same language, it actually includes the de minimis risk permit in the Santa Ana region, which includes discharge from community water systems. So here the wastewater allocations is explicitly assigned to community water systems, but it's not included in the statewide permit. So the statewide permit makes a number of incorrect assertions about the nature of wastewater allocations, the nature of TMDL documents that will be applied in this permit. And there are additional factual errors. For example, it mentions the Ballona Creek TMDL containing selenium. This is not. It does not. Here's the language from the statewide permit. You can see I've highlighted the word selenium. And in fact, you can look at the Ballona Creek and see selenium is not listed there. Copper, lead, and zinc are the only ones listed. So these are just some examples of the factual errors. Now the question is, why is this important to community water systems? Who cares? If you look at the application, the statewide permit requires community water systems in the Los Angeles and San Diego regions to include a TMDL-specific supplement to the notice of intent, which includes laboratory analysis and a list of TMDL-specific best management practices. Right off the bat, I would point out there are no TMDL-specific BMPs. Why include in requirement if they don't in fact exist? But more important is the state board staff are going to take this data that we supply and then make a determination based on procedures and standards that are not included in the method in the permit. And then the deputy director can then require community water systems to obtain an individual permit, which is a really big deal. And it's based on the TMDLs that we'd be required to comply with based on laboratory analysis required by the statewide permit in the notice of intent supplement. Now, why is this requirement even in the permit? The permit explicitly states, based on the data that is currently available, and due to the high quality and intermittent and short-term nature of the discharge from drinking water systems authorized under this order, it is unlikely these charges will contribute to an impairment of TMDL-related water bodies, which is certainly one of our main points. We don't believe that community water systems are in fact impairing waters. And in fact, none of the waters listed in the 303D list are impaired because of discharge from community water systems. So what the statewide permit is doing is saying to communities, only community water systems in the Los Angeles, San Diego regions, to monitor discharges so the state board can use an unknown procedure to determine if something that it does not believe will actually occur might occur. So we believe that these requirements are vague, ambiguous, and arbitrary. And overall, the permit just has far too many problematic elements, as these are just examples of. We believe that either this permit should be withdrawn or be subject to a second round of written public comment. So thank you all very much.
Don't leave.
Okay.
Ms. Messina,
Yes.
please help me understand his concern.
Okay, and so I've listed them down, and actually, thank you, David, for
Certainly.
the presentation. It was really helpful to just show how complicated TMDLs are. So the examples he showed down in Region 4, that was just the start, because there's numerous receiving waters that have TMDL, different averaging periods. Some are for the water column, some are for sediment, and so forth. So we took the approach for this permit that because these discharges are low threat in nature and they're short-term or intermittent, that the state board in adopting this permit is believing that in general these type discharges are not contributing to the impairment. So phrased another way, if you were to treat these discharges for the pollutant in which there's an impairment, the impairment would probably still exist. So why would we be making water purveyors treat for these small discharges? Now, we are not creating waste load allocations in this permit. Attachment G is reserved for waste load allocations or specific numeric effluent limitations that apply specifically to a TMDL. And we have not found any TMDLs through the state adopted as of today's date that a water purveyor needs a numeric effluent limitation if they fulfill the criteria of this permit. So basically what we're saying is, or we're proposing, for these mandatory discharges that do not adversely impact the beneficial use, there is no reason to provide any further treatment or control to address TMDLs that are in existence at this time. So we're not adding a waste load allocation. I understand what Mr. Kimbrough is saying, because when you think about it, just allowing water purveyors to discharge this additional load is as if you're cutting up the pie differently. We're not looking at it this way. We're looking at it as these discharges are coming in through MS4s or whatever, and it's within the TMDL structure, and this is the only way we see feasibly to regulate and implement these TMDLs on a statewide basis. Now, do you have any questions on that? Because I have those other items he addressed.
And these, I think, the discussion is useful because it deals with the issue of unintended consequences, in terms. So I acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. At the same time, in my experience with all the complexity of TMDLs and water bodies and pollutants, I think it's useful also to really narrow the discussion to, those potential pollutants within drinking water, and then connecting the dots and how this permit with its requirements for BMPs functionally equivalent to what otherwise would be expected in TMDL implementation. In other words, no new requirements. If you comply with this permit, you are controlling those pollutants to the maximum extent practicable, or to use some other term. I don't know if that's a loaded term, but and so in other words, you bring up the issue from one perspective. How does this create more requirements? Our intent, as I understand, is the other way around. How do we pave the way to compliance with TMDLs through the adoption of this permit? The concept of coverage. You do this, you implement this permit, you don't worry about TMDLs. I mean, that's, because you're doing the things that a TMDL would otherwise require. Control sediment.
Exactly.
Reduce chlorine, don't put too much copper in your water supply and create problems, that kind of thing. So, I think Ms. Messina has answered the question. Mm-hmm. But we can look at specific language, between now and the adoption hearing to make sure there aren't unintended consequences.
Right.
Might I suggest that actually, no, I'm trying to remember now. With adoption of a permit, there is no board resolution. Okay, never mind. Because if there's a way to make that more clear.
Well, I mean, there are a couple ways it can be addressed. I mean, one is staff could consider it with respect to the fact sheet. There will be a companion resolution associated with the mitigated negative declaration.
Okay.
I mean, there are different vehicles where staff could attempt to address this issue.
If it helps, we concur with you. I mean, the intent, as Mr. Moore so eloquently put it, is not to add additional requirements on something that we believe to be of a non-threat nature, but to do our best to provide that regulatory coverage that Ms. Messina spoke of in terms of your discharge under the Clean Water Act.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All done?
That's it.
Thank you very much.
Diana, did you have other comments you wanted to make?
I did, just to kind of paint
to
the
round
whole
off, yeah.
picture, right, because Mr. Kimbrough had some good comments. When these folks that do discharge into a TMDL water body do analysis of the pollutants for the TMDLs, and they submit that with their application, I've, through conversation with Mr. Kimbrough and others, they're concerned we don't have the criteria in this permit on if they get coverage or not. It's difficult to have that criteria. The different TMDLs not only have different averaging periods, but the impairments are based on different numbers. Now, if we get data that comes in that shows the pollutant for the TMDL is at a concentration greater than the criteria that the impairment is based on, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to put them under this permit, because they discharge very intermittent short term. So just because the concentration of that pollutant is higher than the impairment doesn't throw them out of this permit. So that is why we have cautiously not put in criteria on what needs to be met in order to get coverage under this permit if you discharge into a TMDL. Okay. And then one of the last items has to do with TMDLs in other regions, and specifically, I think he mentioned Napa River and Sonoma Creek. We did reach out to Region 2 on that, and we look to all our regional board staff to help us interpret their TMDLs. And for those two in specific, Region 2 wrote back and said that they do not look at water purveyors as actually being a significant source of sediment. And so even though the TMDLs are written in that way, they believe that this permit and the BMPs that are required will address what the TMDLs are. And that regional board, those staff specifically told us that they do not believe that those TMDLs should be listed in this permit.
I hope that was helpful too,
Yes,
to
thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now, Gary Soketh, and followed by Pablo Ramuda, Josh Nelson, Toby Roy, Ricky Russell, Dana Strawn, Catherine Rubin, Chandra Johansson, Lori Schechtel, David Boland, hello, David, and Greg Bukab. 11. Oh, 3 minutes each.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to thank you guys for having water purveyors here to speak on the NPDES permit process. I also want to apologize that I'm going to be reading a little verbatim on this because I don't want to go back to Modesto and have my subject matter experts yell at me for missing some points on this. My name is Gary Soyseth. I'm the regulatory administrator at the Modesto Irrigation District. We believe there have been substantial improvements made to this version when compared to the prior version. A sincere thank you to your staff for their outreach efforts, which we believe were critical to the adequacy of the current draft permit. We found the addition of wholesalers, transmission systems, and water treatment plants to the coverage under the permit to be especially practical and useful. MID requests that the board remove the requirement that water purveyors dechlorinate a discharge when that discharge is put to beneficial reuse. Attachment E, Section 2, Part D of the draft permit states that monitoring is not required when the discharges are put to multiple uses or beneficial reuses, so long as the discharge has undergone monitoring under Section 6 before its contact with the surface water. For some systems, like MIDs, the use of the term surface water requires us to chemically dechlorinate the water when our canal system and the proposed uses of the water can, and do, naturally dechlorinate the water without chemicals. Natural dechlorination occurs rapidly in the sunshine and upon contact with soil, such as when MID discharges into its supply canals, which allows sunshine to dechlorinate the water during conveyance and upon the delivery of the water when the water is applied to soil, either in the form of irrigation or groundwater recharge. Also, and just more generally, MID tries to avoid using any chemical unnecessarily, which is what we believe will occur if the State Water Board ordered the introduction of dechlorinating materials when there is a natural process in place to perform the same function. MID respectfully requests that the board amend the language on page 5 of the final draft order so that the relevant sentence ends with the phrase, quote, prior to the surface water discharge or the final surface water discharge where privately owned open air canals are used as a conveyance structure. We also respectfully request that page C1, section 1A be amended so that it reads, quote, all chlorinated water shall be dechlorinated except where such discharges are applied as a beneficial reuse. Secondly, we ask that you reconsider the de minimis amount concept. Any sampling carries a certain amount of risk. In some cases, there can be significant safety concerns when we send our employees to take water samples near open water bodies. It seems that the risk to human safety is more important than the minimal risk to the environment when there's a discharge of a small volume of water containing typical drinking water chlorine residuals. Again, we really thank the staff. We've been working with you a lot. Our subject matter experts at MID enjoy the banter back and forth, so it's good. So please let me know pending any questions. That's all I have.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pablo, and this is, I read all these names out so that you'll be prepared and just pop right up. Actually, if you want to come up and line up, once again, Josh follows Pablo, Toby follows Josh, Ricky follows Toby, Dana follows Ricky, Catherine is already up in front, Chandra is after Catherine, Lori, David, and Greg. Great.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, I'm sorry, and members of the board. I came in the spring during the public forum time, and at that time I expressed some of our concerns.
Your name, please?
I'm sorry?
Could you state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry, Pablo Ramudo from North Marin Water District. At that time, I wanted to express some concerns that I had and some of the other members of the water community shared, that we weren't being heard, there wasn't adequate stakeholder involvement, and I just wanted to say that that completely turned around. After that meeting, I spoke with Diana Messina at length out in the hallway. She heard my concerns. We had a good conversation about some technical subjects, and I'm very happy that the permit has evolved into something that's much more practical for us to comply with and won't affect our ability to deliver clean, safe drinking water to our customers. So thank you very much for that. I also just wanted to give a couple of brief comments, a couple of things. One that has been addressed a number of times, but is still in the permit in a way that I think might be problematic, and that's the chlorine residual, the minimum level of reporting being 0.1 milligrams per liter. With some of these field meters measuring the discharges of this type, there are a lot of interferences, and although that's spelled out that numeric results that exceed that 0.1 will be accepted as complying with an explanation of what those interferences are. I just want to make sure that the permit addresses exactly how often these false positives are going to happen, because of the nature of these permits. They're going to happen quite frequently, and that level might be a little bit too low. Another thing that has not been talked about too much by some of the other commenters is the requirement in Section 4 of the permit, the logging of each of the BMPs used. I have a concern that if we are logging each discharge, each instance of a BMP that's used, we could have several hundred different log entries per week, and this is going to be extremely tedious for some of our operators to go and log that. Although these are log entries that are not going to be sent in as part of the self-monitoring report, it's to be kept at our headquarters. I wanted to see if in fact that was the intent of the permit, that each and every instance of a discharge be logged with the BMPs used, or was it more of a general idea of the BMPs that are normally used by our district for these discharges? And also one thing that could be done to minimize that tedium for our operators would be to apply the same threshold that's used for the event discharges or the larger volume discharges. And that's it for my comments. Thank you very much.
Diana?
Would you like me to address that?
Mhm.
Okay, great. So, all right. So I'm going to go to the second item that Pablo had commented on to let you know our intentions. And he is referring to item number 6 on the end of page 14. And the permit does require the discharger to maintain a documented log of all the BMPs implemented for its discharges. And our intent is that they document the BMPs for those type of discharges, not necessarily every single one. I'm trying to be practical here. When I went out in the field with some of the district operational staff, they showed me the sheets they have, and they actually do keep log of everything to show their district what has been done and what hasn't been done. So that's basically what we had in our mind. I'm hearing a lot of folks saying that's a lot of documentation. If that's the issue, we're not intending that they keep every single piece of paper. What we do want, though, is a log of what they have done for those type of discharges. So each individual different type of discharges, and we are open to changing the wording in the permit.
Thank you. Josh?
Hi, good afternoon. Josh Nelson with Best and Krieger here today on behalf of the Western Municipal Water District, Sweetwater Authority, Padre Dam Municipal Water District, and the Santa Fe Irrigation District. We endorse the San Diego County Water Authority's comments, and we are attending the hearing today to support their efforts and to raise some additional issues. Related to timing, the State Board needs to give everyone more time to assess the proposed permit and to allow the State Board to make the changes requested at this workshop. Right now, the workshop is scheduled obviously for today, and the adoption hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks later on November 4th. We are concerned that this doesn't provide sufficient time for changes based on the comments received today. Additionally, there are many water providers in California that were, until recently, were unaware of this proceeding. These stakeholders need more time to review the proposed permit and to provide input to the State Board. Based on this, we ask that the State Board move the permit adoption hearing to January 2015 with the effective date of the permit to 120 days thereafter. We appreciate clarification on the jurisdictional issues related to waters of the U.S., which were mentioned earlier. Without reiterating those, we would request that the State Board revise the application requirement to only a list of the named streams that would appear on a standard USGS topographical map. I think we would address a lot of the issues that were raised earlier. Similarly, the permit includes water quality-based effluent limits for chlorine. These limits are based on an EPA water quality standard for chlorine that the State Board has simply dropped in as the effluent limit. There is no dilution credit given. Under the California Toxic Rule State Implementation Policy, dilution credits are supposed to be calculated based on the difference between the water quality standard and the ambient background concentration of the pollutant in the receiving water. That would require a statewide survey of ambient conditions that was not done here. Instead, the State Board is relying on 2 studies from the Bay Area to determine the water quality conditions for the entire state. The State Board further relies on these 2 studies, and only these 2 studies, to determine that all discharges within 300 feet of a receiving water pose a reasonable potential to cause or contribute to an exceedance of water quality standards. This is not sufficient evidence. We object to this methodology and to the inclusion of the effluent in the proposed permit. This also raises 2 larger issues. The first is the reliance on the state implementation policy to develop effluent limits for a statewide general permit. The policy was drafted to provide guidance for individual permits issued by the regional boards. It was not intended to apply to the state permits, hence the problem with being able to determine ambient conditions. The proposed permit does not include effluent limitations because developing them on a statewide basis is not feasible. BMPs are enough. The second issue is whether the State Board needs to make this an MPADS permit at all. The discharges at issue are drinking water discharges, and we believe that the proposed permit could be adopted as a wastewater discharge requirements, or WDRs, rather than as an MPDS permit. If I may just briefly mention my last comment. Last issue on the permit, the proposed permit includes receiving water limitations that prohibit discharges that cause or contribute to, among other things, floating materials, debris, or trash, hydromodification, and turbidity concentrations that exceed corresponding regional water board basin plan water quality objectives and receiving waters downstream of the point of discharge. Whether a discharger can comply with these requirements is not something that is within their control. The conditions present in the receiving MS4, including but not limited to how clean it is and its shape, will dictate whether the discharge of potable water into the system causes a violation of the above listed requirements. These requirements should be removed. Thank you, and thank you for the additional time to finish my comment.
Thank you. Toby?
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Spivey Weber and members of the board. I do appreciate all staff's work on this and the significant changes that were made since the last draft of the permit. I would like to comment first real briefly on the TMDL. the permit, if there's additional requirements associated with the TMDL, it requires us to go out and get a separate individual permit. We would request that if that is the case, we don't think that's going to happen in our area, but that if it is the case that this board should amend this permit to put those requirements into the permit so that we will not operate under multiple permits for the same types of activities within our region. The second is on our written comments. These are not late written comments. There was a substantial change to the permit since the last draft that is inconsistent with the CEQA document. And therefore, our written comments specifically address that substantial change. And the change that was made was in the last draft, treated water discharges from water treatment plants was included. In this draft, that was changed to all treatment plant operations. This is a significant increase in the overall scope of the permit, in that anything that is done at a water treatment plant that is discharged to a water of the U.S. is now subject to this permit. And when you look at the range of treatment plants that are out there, there's a wide range for different purposes: surface water treatment plants, green sand filters, ion exchange, RO, our seawater desalination. That's a treatment plant that could be subject to this permit. And so when we looked at the scope of it, we tried to look at it. It does not describe what a treatment plant operation is in the permit. So we went to the CEQA document and said, well, maybe we can get a clue of what they mean by treatment plant operations. The CEQA mentions specifically draining water treatment plant facilities for cleaning or maintenance. And so is that what treatment plant operations means for this permit, or does the board intend it to be construed much more broadly, in which case that broad construction would need to be included in the CEQA document? We would request that the full force of treatment plant operations not be included in this permit. We would like to see it focused on specifically on the drinking water discharges. And if the state board does wish to regulate treatment plant operations, that would be done through a separate process that addresses the wide range of technologies for treatment that are out there and the different BMPs that might be associated with those treatment processes. This permit does not have any specific BMPs associated with drinking water discharges. And I will say in our region, we have a number of treatment plants that discharge to their own agency-owned reservoirs.
I tell you what, before you go further, unless you have another point to make, let's just go straight to this, because that's your that's your main point, is
Right.
that,
And we would like to put our letter into the record.
well, let's go to the answer to your question, which I think is more important than your letter.
Okay, so I'm going to address just the point
Right.
that Toby is addressing at this time, and that is in regards to our CEQA document and water treatment facilities. Okay. The CEQA document is to support the resolution for the board granting an exception to the California Toxic Rule constituents in the ocean plan. This CEQA document and this exception is not solely for this statewide NPDES permit. The exception can be implemented to other NPDES permits. In the mitigated negative declaration, we have the following that is included, and we purposely kept it broad because we wanted to make sure if this exception was implemented through a stormwater NPDES permit or through a different NPDES permit, it would still capture it. But it does say raw and treated drinking water discharges from water transmission, treatment, storage, and distribution facility operation and maintenance. And so we do include treatment plants in there. Now, the concerns that Ms. Roy has, they're valid concerns. However, when we have a treatment operation, and she goes, I was able to read the letter during the previous items. She's concerned about the treatment operations they have for removing nitrate, perchlorate, iron, manganese, and rightfully so. Now, the exception that is being granted through this mitigated negative declaration is for California Toxic Rule constituents or basin plan objectives. Nitrate, perchlorate, iron, manganese, those are not California Toxic Rule constituents. Even if they were, the exception is for constituents that are more stringent than maximum contaminant levels. We have primary MCLs for nitrate and perchlorate, and we have secondary for for iron and manganese. And so the exception does not allow an exceedance of the MCLs. And so if they do have a treatment byproduct that's going into receiving water that is high in nitrates, that's an issue that will need to be looked at a little further on a site-specific basis.
Does that help you?
Not really. It doesn't, actually, our issue is primarily with the surface water treatment plant. So our
With what?
with surface water treatment plants.
Okay.
So in our region, surface water treatment plants have, which was kind of the next part of my comments, they have discharged to their own agency-owned reservoir for the past 50 years. Without a permit, and about every 5 years, the regional board comes out and says, we might need to regulate this. And then we go, no, the agencies own the facilities, it's not impacting, we manage the lakes or the reservoirs, and it's not impacting our water supply, which is the primary purpose of that water body. And so putting this in this permit raises the question, are we under this permit? Are we not under this permit? And we do believe that these discharges are not subject to this permit. We also, the discharges back to the reservoirs are reused, so they're a form of reuse, and we would like the permit to acknowledge that. And then the other thing is...
I'm sorry, could I interrupt you on that one point?
Sure.
So these are reservoirs, and I'm familiar with this issue because I served on the regional board in San Francisco, and there's different kinds of reservoirs. There's on-stream that are in the basin plan that have beneficial uses that include aquatic life. And then there's off-stream reservoirs that we've actually removed from the basin plan in Region 2. Because, so the scenario depends. If there are aquatic life beneficial uses, yes, you should be covered under this permit because you could potentially, with chlorine, have the reasonable potential to cause or contribute to an exceedance of a water quality standard.
Okay, so we have both on-stream and off-stream reservoirs, and they're all listed. They're all currently listed in the basin plan. We do think some of them should not be
Right.
subject to the basin plan.
Good, and that's actually there. We have a track record of addressing that in the water boards.
So the other issue that we have is because this has been a long-term practice, the agencies aren't necessarily going to be able to comply immediately with any with the limitations in this permit, which puts it at 20 NTU for the basin plan objective, and then it would require. So it basically requires the construction of significant facilities at the water treatment plant site. And so let's say somebody finds it does apply, and now this permit goes into force. Immediately, the agencies could potentially be out of compliance with the permit. So it's a serious issue for us because we would like to be in compliance with all the permit requirements, and it puts us at risk as far as being, not being able to comply with the permit. And so we would ask the board to consider also if it's beneficial reuse, an exception for that it be included in the list of beneficial reuse. And if it is going to apply to allow enough time in the permit to be able to come into compliance. Because it takes about, I would say, 3 years to design and construct solids removals facilities and dechlorination facilities. So that's
Thank
that's
you.
an issue for us.
Thank you.
And I will leave the letter, and you can decide if you want to accept it or not.
I think we've already decided. Thank you.
Okay.
Ricky?
Good afternoon, Vice Chair, members of the board. My name is Ricky Russell with California Coastkeeper Alliance. I would like to first off thank board staff for their willingness and time to answer our questions in the development of the drinking water discharge permit. As one of the only environmental groups, if not the only one, we believe that their outreach has been really helpful to develop a permit that will balance human health needs, ecosystem needs, as well as the water purveyors' needs to develop clean and safe drinking water. And furthermore, I would like to express our satisfaction in the inclusion of language and actions that will encourage the beneficial use and reuse of discharged water. Speaking to those points, all in all, we think the permit benefits all parties involved. It benefits water quality by protecting against just discharges with the potential to harm ecosystem health. It benefits the board by conserving resources and streamlining processes. And importantly, it benefits water purveyors by protecting them from enforcement actions and unintended yet serious violations of the Clean Water Act. For this reason, we believe it is in everyone's interest that the board adopt a permit that will cover as many water purveyors as possible. As the staff pointed out, only 80% or the vast majority of water purveyors will be uncovered by this permit with the threshold of 1,000 connections or more. So while we're not asking for down to 15 connections, we believe that somewhere around 600 would be a more appropriate coverage, as it would be beneficial, and whether they're covered or not, they will be need to fulfill the many requirements of the permit regardless. Towards streamlining processes, we understand the board's motivation towards relaxing some of the monitoring and reporting requirements. Neither do we as an organization wish to see requirements that will drain water purveyors of the resources they need to fulfill other important requirements. However, we believe that the reporting requirements that relax how and exactly where discharges are reported upon creates a loophole, and there will be instances where certain dischargers will not have a clear idea of where they are discharging to. And we're really uncomfortable with that precedent and believe that there should be